Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Josh Vickers with RTI International and the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence. I will be helping host and moderate today's event. But before we do get started, I would like to introduce Ms. Christine Dieters from ASCLD to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second series of the ASCLD Train the Directors series. Our first series was done in 2016 with 5 or 6 disciplines, and so we wanted to continue this year to present some additional disciplines for this series. The focus of our topics this year were fire debris, trace analysis, or trace evidence, excuse me, digital forensics, NIBIN opportunities and challenges, and we're also covering quality assurance today. And so the objective of this training has been for experts in the field and laboratory directors to share share operational challenges and insights that managers may have overseeing that particular discipline in the crime laboratory, as well as solutions on how they resolve challenges. Today's talk obviously focuses more on QA, which covers all of the disciplines and something that we all can continue to learn about. So today we're excited to give you the QA discipline, and I'm going to go ahead and let Josh introduce our 2 speakers, but I wanted to let you know that we will be entertaining questions at the end of the presentation, and we will be capturing those questions from the chat pod and putting them to a cache so that we can make sure and answer every one of them towards the end of our session today. So again, welcome, and thank you for taking your time to listen, learn, and participate in this webinar. Enjoy.
Thank you, Christine. Today's webinar, again, will be on quality assurance in the forensic laboratory, specifically transitioning from 17025 in 2005 to 17025 2017 and what lessons were learned. We do have 2 subject matter experts and presenters today. Our first is Brooke Arnone. She worked for the Arizona Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory since 1998. And then she became a supervisor in 2007 and the quality assurance manager for the AZDPS Crime Laboratory System in 2013. She holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of Arizona, a master's in education, specifically secondary sciences, from Columbus State University, as well as a certificate in laboratory management with an emphasis in forensic science laboratory management from the University of California, Davis Extension. Her forensic expertise include toxicology as well as controlled substances. She also currently serves on the board of directors for the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors and is currently the president-elect. Our second presenter and subject matter expert today is Mr. Stuart Raley. He is employed in the Scientific Analysis Bureau since 2008, and he is currently a supervising forensic scientist in the SAB Quality Assurance Unit. His previous experience includes supervising forensic scientists in the Controlled Substances Unit, forensic scientists in the Quality Assurance Unit, and forensic scientists in the DNA Casework Unit. Prior to coming to AZTPS, Mr. Raley was employed with the North Louisiana Criminalistics Laboratory in Shreveport, Louisiana, for 8 years as a DNA analyst and anthropologist. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Animal Biology from Louisiana Tech University and a Master's of Arts degree in Anthropology from Louisiana State University. Just a quick disclaimer, the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any product and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without any further ado, I would like to hand things over to our presenters today, Ms. Arnone and Mr. Raley.
Good afternoon. We really appreciate everybody taking their time to listen to quality assurance. It's not often that we have so many people interested in quality. This is our transitioning from the 17025 2005 to the 2017. We went through our transition in November, so hopefully we can give you some tips and tricks and maybe some guidance. And please know that if there's anything in the presentation that you want further information on, please ask the question, or if there's something that you would like for us at a later date, please give us that information and we'll be more than happy to send you some of our additional information. So hopefully today we're going to give you some of the lessons that we learned or we think we learned, and we'll go from there.
So there's been a lot of talk leading up to this presentation, and kind of got Brooke and I a little freaked out with the expectation. So I just want you all to know this is our experience, and our experience in Arizona, and the expectation. We just want to set you up for reality, and this is probably where we'll end up. So it's still edible. And it still will work, but it might not be exactly what you're expecting. We too have a disclaimer that the views and opinions in this presentation are not those of ANAB or the Arizona Department of Public Safety. They're just the views and opinions of Brooke and I, and nothing more.
If we could do the first poll. Hello?
So we want to kind of get an idea of who our audience is, and who and what experience you all have with transitioning. We understand that we were one of the first handful of labs to transition, and it just worked out in our accreditation cycle. So if you could take a moment to kind of fill that out and enter the poll results, and then we can better understand who we're talking to.
So it looks like most of you are transitioning this year to the 17025, the 2017 version, so hopefully this will be of benefit to you. That 9% of you approximately that already transitioned, as you're sitting back wondering if you did some of the same things we did. We know we all have different results that come from our accreditation. I will tell you up front, we did have findings, but we ended up with only 2 very small findings, so we're kind of going from that angle of our experience. This is just a reminder as we put this out there that starting in June of this year, all laboratories will be assessed against the 2017 3125, and we also all know that ANAB has continued to make changes along the way from the first documents that they published, so make sure that you have all of the correct documentation. If you have an issue or you have a problem, please contact ANAB directly, as we are not involved with the accreditation body, but if it's not you, you might want to go ahead and back out of this presentation and contact ANAB directly. We've all want to know what our learning objectives are. We have 3 that we hope we're going to reach for you today. One is to give you some strategies on how to make the transition. One is going to help you with some areas of focus, and then we're going to go through and give you our lessons learned. Before we start, everybody sit back and take a deep breath. You've probably seen that, heard that. We all know as quality assurance managers or people involved in quality assurance or people who have quality assurance managers respond to them that it's hectic. So make sure you are taking time for yourself and make sure you're taking time for those that are helping you. The first objective that we're going to go through are the strategies to make some transitions. Again, as a reminder, these are strategies that we did that helped us. We'll be more than happy to share any of those with you in more detail. The first thing you should do is making sure you do a gap analysis. Most of you are probably panicking a little bit with all the new changes, thinking that you have to change everything, but you don't. Make sure you do that gap analysis to see how much you really have to change. In all reality, your quality assurance manual is probably 95% ready for the transition. The next step with that would then be look at your manuals. Don't start with your discipline manual, start with your quality assurance manual. That's the best place to start because everything should be functioning outside of the quality manual. The discipline manuals in all likelihood will not have to be altered at all. We also developed a crosswalk for our manuals, and most people that saw our crosswalk had no idea. They thought it was a foreign language we were speaking, so it might not necessarily help the staff, but it sure helped us in QA. If you haven't already purchased the new standard, you need to get it because you can't go through accreditation without it. But more importantly, have you taken the time to actually read the standards? We all in the past could actually probably quote every 5.2.3.1a. It's difficult now because all of them have changed, and getting to learn them from our side, knowing that it's standard 7 or standard 8, is a little bit more difficult, and everybody's looking to the quality assurance team to know exactly what standard they might be in violation of, or they might have to do a little bit more research on. So make sure you're allowing your staff, or you're especially allowing QA, to take the time to read the standards to make sure they are understanding them.
So some of the things that we thought of prior to transitioning is that we decided to get our tech leads, our supervisors, as involved in the preparation as possible. When we go through an audit or a reassessment, they're going to be sort of your frontline interaction with the auditors. And so we thought that we should get them involved in the changes that were coming up, get them involved in drafting their manuals, and get them involved in just talking with their direct reports. About 6 months out, we had a company come in, Seaglass Training, to kind of go through the new standards with us and kind of get their viewpoint on what was changing and how it was changing. And, you know, it doesn't have to be Seaglass, it doesn't have to be anybody, but you need to look for webinars, look for other opinions so that you can get an understanding of what's going to be required of your lab to come into compliance. And then we kind of actually started asking questions last year during our surveillance visit, just about how the direction we wanted to go, the direction we were thinking about going. Would this, you know, kind of, you know, bring us into compliance? What about this? What about that? The accrediting body, at least ANAB, you know, has regularly scheduled phone calls with accreditation managers that most quality managers are a part of or emailed on. If you're not emailed on or not part of that email list, contact ANAB, and they will add you to that list if you're a quality manager. But, you know, these are the kind of things that you just ask questions and see what flies, see what doesn't fly, and try to get an understanding of what's expected.
We had some other strategy hints that we wanted to give you. If you walked into our quality assurance area, people thought we were a little crazy. We have multiple whiteboards. We used our whiteboards to our advantage. People would come in and write up ideas. We used them as we set up calendars to start scheduling out our meetings. I printed out calendars starting from our last assessment in 2017 all the way up to when I had to put in the application for this year. We had weekly meetings, we had monthly meetings. It depended upon what the meeting was about as to who we brought in. We did not do all the work. We're very fortunate that we have technical leaders that when they are doing technical work, they respond directly to quality assurance. And in this case, we had gone to our superintendent, letting them know that this was a major undertaking and that we were going to have to involve our technical leaders and supervisors and would be giving them specific tasks. We did obviously trust that we were giving tasks to people who would turn them in, but we also know that we all have to trust but verify. So just as an example of what one of our whiteboards looked like at any given time, we would come in and write things up. So you can see we started writing things about, don't forget about access for your assessors when they're on site. If you don't have Wi-Fi, that's now a requirement that they have access to an internet. We had to look at our PTs because of it being in November when we were having our assessment. We still had some PTs that were outstanding, mostly in our DNA section, but we had to have a plan for those. We had to look at things like transportation for our assessors. We have 4 different labs all over the state of Arizona that we are responsible for, and we had to determine whether or not what airport they were going to fly into and how they were going to get from lab to lab. Yes, a lot of times that is part of the A&AB sets up the travel, but they wanted our assessors to fly into Las Vegas, and Las Vegas to our closest lab is still about a 3-hour drive. We were fortunate enough that we were able to get airplanes from our own DPS fleet, and they drove our assessors, excuse me, they didn't drive, they flew our assessors out to the laboratories. So we were very involved with even the transportation of our assessors. But those were things as we were starting our transition that we were trying to think about, so we would get rid of some of the last minute things. We went through each of our manuals and determined whether or not they had to be updated. And again, we have a quality assurance manual as well as what we call a general procedure manual. And we took this opportunity to take everything out of our general procedure manual that was quality driven and remove it so that we didn't have conflicts between our 2 manuals, and it's actually worked out in our favor. We looked at all of our training to make sure that they were now in compliance with all of the new changes in the accreditation. We also have a variety of forms, so we tried to just go through and use our whiteboards for things that we knew we had to do. We didn't know when we were going to do them at this point, but we used it just as an idea board.
We also, like we said, developed our crosswalk, and this is mainly for our use because when, like Brooke said, when we gave it to the lab, because we actually thought people, were really interested in quality assurance and accreditation and the QAM and the GPM, and they were really geeking out on it like we were. They were not. So we thought that this would be really beneficial, and it turned out that the bench level analyst and most people outside of quality assurance really didn't pay attention and were confused by the crosswalk. But it helped us because we were able to make sure that the jumps and leaps that we needed to make, we were able to make sure that those strings were attached, and we were addressing everything that we needed to address in our new manual. We completely revised our quality manual, reordered it, reorganized it, and we just wanted to make sure that we weren't leaving stuff out. We also took the opportunity to revise our general procedures manual. It had some quality content, and so we kind of took that out and put that into our quality manual so that the general procedures manual would be more of a personnel manual and the quality manual would be more of a quality assurance manual.
One thing that helped with our agency is that because we are fortunate to have a section that is just labeled quality assurance, we let our entire staff know that this was available for them to review at any point, and they could come and go and ask questions. So we did not hide anything during this reassessment. We kept everything out in the open. Not that we hid things in the past. I didn't mean it to come out like that, but we made sure that we had everything front and center. People knew why we were making changes. They were expecting changes to come, and they could ask questions, and we could follow up with either emails or training classes to our own staff as questions were coming in. One of the last things that we would talk about as far as strategies is during this whole time we were keeping communication open. I just mentioned that we were making sure we were communicating with our staff, but one thing we found out is we had to make sure they were actually understanding what we were saying, because to them QA is like internal affairs, and if they get called into the QA corner, they must be in trouble. And we were very much trying to make sure that the communication going out was that this was just a change in our accrediting body guidelines, and that everything that they were doing was still true and accurate, and they were following quality assurance. Once we were assigned a lead assessor, the lead assessor and myself were in constant communication. She probably got very tired of hearing from me, but I made sure that I was following up either with a phone call or following up with email communication at least once a week for the earlier parts, and then as we got closer, as says it on there, it should be on your speed dial that you were communicating with your lead assessor. We all know that through some of the training classes when the transition was occurring, they made a comment in some of the training that said quality managers are no longer necessary, and that actually ran rampant through our bureau that said, oh, you're not even a needed position, and we kind of joked about it and said, well, would you like to do this transition? That is not exactly what the accrediting body was going for. They were just saying that named positions are things that's up to your agency. So if anybody has been told they don't need a quality manager because that's what your accrediting body said, we beg to differ. And as most of you, I recognize a lot of the names on this list. I know you're involved in quality, and you know it's very difficult to do your job unless you can get the support that you need a quality assurance manager position. And that's something that we had to deal with our own agency once some of those training things came out. If we could please put up the next poll. So we just want to know if there's some things that those of you that haven't transitioned, have you tried any of these things? Have you been working on them? Are you just so overwhelmed that you're not going to do any of them? Give you a few minutes there to fill out that poll.
All right, so we see that some of you have well on your way to transitioning, and others either maybe you haven't started yet, or you've got a different way that you're transitioning, which is perfectly fine. I think it depends on the size of the lab. It depends on the personnel you have in the lab. But as long as you're in the game and you're thinking about it and you're in this presentation, it tells us that at least you're heading in the right direction. But we want to make sure that we reiterate that you just need to relax, breathe, and it'll come through, and just kind of knock your issues down one at a time. When you're in the middle of it, it seems like it's overwhelming. However, when you look back on it, if you have all your ducks in a row, it's pretty painless. So our second learning objective is key areas to focus on when we transition. Now this is just for us, and when we transition, we kind of looked through our quality manual, we did our gap analysis, and we really wanted to shore up these areas. These might not apply to you, these might apply to you, and I'm just kind of go through 17025 standards and some 3125 standards. I'm not really going to call out the standard name other than the big ones, but these are kind of things that we looked at when we went through our transition. One big message that we got from our accrediting body is that the 17025 and the 3125 put more emphasis on what you did, but not exactly how you do it. And as we kind of talk to other labs and we get more information, their method was that they wanted to put more emphasis on identifying and evaluating risks. And our personnel, we've been trying to kind of hammer them about, well, what is a big risk thing that you can't let slide? And what's a low risk thing that you can let slide, or maybe you don't need to be on top of it every day because the risk of it jacking things up is pretty low. And so that's kind of the approach we took towards our transition. And quite honestly, our quality manual, we did not lower the stringency that much of our quality manual. We kind of met everything on the surface level and very fundamentally met every standard. It was kind of the finer points that we wanted to put in our quality manual to make sure that the message was carried through. So we focused on, of course, the scope. There's been a lot of discussion about the scope, and that's not going to really be discussed a lot here. But the scope defines how your lab is viewed by the accrediting body. The scope has changed for the international program for A&AB or ASCLD lab, and now the current scope for the reassessment, it's quite different. And so for the ASCLD labs, there was a lot of questions about the scope. But whatever your scope ends up being, that is how your accrediting body views you, and that's how they will verify objective evidence of your operation. We also looked at our terms and definitions, and we updated our glossary, but we did not add or delete everything. We just looked at the terms that we wanted to emphasize. Some of the things in the glossary we felt were common knowledge in our lab based on our previous revisions of our quality manual, and so we might have taken those out. But some of the things that we put in, we really wanted to emphasize those. So standard 4 has impartiality. This is kind of a new standard, but it's really not. They kind of package things differently with 17025 and 3125. Like I said, it's all about identifying and evaluating risks. So how does your lab identify and evaluate impartiality? How do they identify the relationships to law enforcement officers and your scientists? A thing that came up in our lab was we have people who are on boards of different organizations. And so what kind of risk to impartiality does that involve? So the ownership is placed on the lab, not on the individual or the accrediting body. So once again, we went through it and we identified kind of impartiality risks, and it was really a thought process because we had to really think about things that we didn't understand or we hadn't thought about before. So we incorporate those in our QAM, and also this is where you'll find the guiding principles or now some equivalent document. Standard 5, as Brooke mentioned earlier, the director is still a named position, but other named positions are gone. However, I think the accrediting body was going for, we're not going to tell you that you need a quality manager, but you're going to have somebody who's responsible for this stuff. We're not going to tell you that you need tech leads, but you're going to have somebody who's responsible for this stuff, because if it doesn't get done, there's going to have to be somebody on the hook for it. And so that's what Brooke was alluding to when people were joking, like, oh, we don't need a quality manager. Well, that's great. Here's my office. You can come in and you can do my job. And they ran away pretty quickly. So we understand the importance of having somebody responsible for overseeing the quality of the technical work in a department. The other issue is that now that they started to include that INDUS participating labs must follow whichever QAS that they are applicable to. Standard 6. This was a new one to us because we went from the 17025 2005 and the 2011 ASCLD Lab supplemental straight to 3125, and I think that this might have come up a little bit in 3028 with A&AB's 3028, but the personnel who influence results must be competency tested before conducting tests on evidence items. Some of our units did supervisory casework where they had analysts do the work under direct supervision of an experienced analyst. Now that's not going to fly, and we have to put those individuals through competency tests. Also, people who perform validations need to be authorized to do so. So we had to change up the way that we authorize people just to include that they can do validations. And then one of the big changes or reorganizations is that reagents are now crammed into the equipment portion of Standard 6. So when people look for reagents and they can't find it, it's going to be buried in Standard 6. Standard 7 is a big one. Standard 7 is a pretty lengthy standard, and it goes into request tenders and contracts, what kind of database search you'll be using. For us, since we are a state lab, we have different levels of our DNA databases that we can use, and so we had to identify those. We used to identify them, then we kind of identified that risk as being pretty low and took it out, and then we read the new standards, and now it's back in there a little bit differently though. Introduction of a decision rule, and this really applies to how you're going to account for measurement uncertainty when you're stating conformity with a specific requirement, and mostly this applies to blood alcohol testing. And then ensuring the validity of results. This is kind of where another reorganization of standards and kind of where they put the individual standards under one big standard. So testimony review came under sort of a technical review of testimony, and now you have to be competency tested in the scope of the review, which puts our tech leads at a disadvantage because we have multiple labs in the state, take for instance DNA, and so we have to be, prosecutor can't do the review anymore, a supervisor can't do the review unless they have been competency tested in the scope of the review, and so we had to really logistically think about how we were going to do that. Each discipline needs a review, but there's no timeline or frequency, and that goes to your evaluation of risk. Maybe your newer people you want to review more often than your experienced people, but each discipline needs a review.
And when it talks about no timeline or frequency, we wrote it into our manual that ours have to be reviewed annually. But the accrediting body says the technical aspects of the testimony have to be done at least once within your accreditation cycle. So we know we've made ours more stringent, as Stuart mentioned, that we've left our quality manual with things that are a lot more regimented than some of the accrediting body requirements, but it works for us, and that way we can ensure that we are getting as much of our testimony evaluated as possible.
More in Standard 7, issued reports, and I underlined issued because those are the reports that go out. They're to be kept as technical records. We were doing that, but we just needed clarification for our analysts. And then back in the old, ASCLD lab days, you remember had those 3-door options of where the required information was going to go on your report, and I can't remember which door it was, but they said, you can have this required information on the report, and then some other required information can be, in your notes. Well, that's no longer an option, but what they do give you is they give you the option of doing sort of a simplified report as long as you have entered into agreement with your customer. And the simplified report, the agreement needs to let the customer know what information is not going to be on the report, and of course what information is going to be on the report is in the report itself. And the way that we did this is that we put out on our website, we put sort of an announcement and a service bulletin out that said, this is how we're going to report out things. And our reporting really didn't change at all. And so it was, once again, more communication with our customer.
Also, with that, it changed. That's one of the standards that changed from the time we started going through this procedure to the end. Originally, A&AB had said you had to tell them what wasn't going to be on your report versus what is on your report. So just make sure that you're following the right guideline and you're communicating with your customer. We also found that when we went through our assessment, this was one of the areas they had a question, and we were able to show that we go out to our different law enforcement agencies and we do training, and we can show them what we train them on, whether it's in DNA or whether it's in toxicology, as to what the reports mean when they get something with just an ELISA result on it versus if they get something that has a stat on it. So make sure you are communicating with your users, and every report might be slightly different. What we didn't want to have happen was have our reports be, instead of 2 pages, maybe they were now going to be 8 pages. So we were trying to come up with a way, because our users don't want an 8-page report. They want a report that they can quickly look at that says what the result is.
Standard 8, this was confusing to us when we first came across it, but 3125 just gives us option A, and so we left it at that. And so we didn't really, get into much conversation about option A versus option B, but all forensic labs fall into option A because that's the standard of, that's the option that deals with conformance to 17025 and testing and calibration. So I'm not really going to get into much of it, but there's an appendix B in 17025 for you to read and maybe confuse yourself like I did myself. But it's in there, and that's why you see the option A in 3125, and there really isn't an option B. Also in Standard 8, sort of the new one was actions to address risks and opportunities. And this is a big one, and from my experience and my personal viewpoint, I think this is the kind of fundamental message that these new standards convey. Yes, you have to be in compliance with all these standards. How you do that is up to you, but they want you to, or want us to really focus on identifying risks and evaluating those risks. And those high-risk areas that we've identified, we need to have more control over than maybe those low-risk areas. And so that's something that right now, I think they're just introducing the concept of risk assessment and risk evaluation and risk management. And maybe as we get more comfortable with, this new standard, and we go through a couple reassessments, maybe they'll want more objective evidence that we are, doing formal risk management and risk assessment. But right now, I think, we just want to identify where the risks are coming from and how big of a risk they are. And I think that most of us do that. Most of us do that with our, our corrective action policies and procedures. Most of us do that with our internal audits. Most of us do that with, asking our employees questions about quality assurance, and we do that with controls, and we do that with tech reviews, and how many percentage of your cases are tech reviewed versus admin reviewed. And so I know some labs don't have 100% tech review or 100% admin review. We do here, but those are the kind of things that go into the risk evaluation. Also, this was kind of new to us because I had never made a transition to a new standard. But make sure when you do your first internal audit that your internal audit covers every single standard and every single clause, because you need to make sure that that your management system and your operation system conforms to this document, the 17025 2017, and then the 3125 if you're A&AB. You don't need to do that every year, but you at least need to have a foundation to show that your system complies. And then if that standard doesn't change for you, or how you meet that standard doesn't change for you, then you don't really have to evaluate it in subsequent audits.
one of the things that I'm also responsible for is our end-of-year management review. And we mentioned that in about 2017, we started asking the questions. I don't remember if it was at an ASCLD meeting where we were all being told some of these changes that were going to be occurring. They just didn't know how exactly they were going to be written into the standards. So we started here, at least, asking our technical leaders at the end of the year. I asked them questions regarding training. I asked them questions regarding what type of instruments they might need, things. And I started doing risk assessment a couple of years ago with the end-of-year reviews that they have to give me, and then I turn around and write them in my management review. So we're learning as we go as far as what's needed for the action items coming out of our technical leaders, getting information from our analysts, and not just from the quality assurance side where we look at the corrective actions. We do a safety evaluation where we look at action items from that. We do a look at all of our proficiencies, and that all now gets included in our management review. Every section may not have an action item, but then in the next year I go back and I look to see what they put forth as a suggestion for change and how did we address that. And so those were some of the documents in 2017 that we had our lead assessor look at to see if we were on the right track. And although they can't tell us yes or no necessarily in those words, they gave us guidance of how we might want to think about this, as Stuart was mentioning, looking at the risk and determining for your own agency how high a risk something might be if by chance somebody fails a PT or if by chance somebody doesn't complete a training program, and are you following up on the things you identified as an action item? Because it doesn't matter if our laboratory thinks it's an action item, doesn't necessarily reflect on another laboratory. Or hopefully an assessor's not saying, well, that's not a good action item or a good risk assessment. Again, it's about your own laboratory. So again, you can be really stressed out over the change into the new accreditation standards, or just know that if you've been doing your job, you've been doing a very good job and you're already ready for the transition. Just relax as you go through it. Take it one step at a time. Don't try to do it all in 1 week because that won't work. And hopefully you've been giving yourself at least 6 months or longer to start going through and working through each of the things that you may have to change with your own agency.
So can we have poll 3, please?
So we just kind of wanted to know, is there a particular standard that's causing you to spend more of your time on? We told you standard 8 was a little bit more difficult for us because we were trying to really figure out how it fit into our already prepared quality manual and what some of the methods meant that they were talking about. Well,
And I think that's about right for standard 7 because it kind of brings in all the disciplines for the processes and making sure that no discipline was less stringent than the quality manual. And we were fortunate that we had our disciplines mostly locked up and in good order, but I can certainly understand that 7 would give people a lot of time to work through, and of course we can understand that all of them could warrant your attention most of the time.
So we just wanted to end with some lessons that we learned while we were doing this. We may have already mentioned them, but it never hurts to go through them again. The first one I can't reiterate enough. Once you get a lead assessor assigned to you, you hound that lead assessor to make sure that you are getting your documents, that they're doing the gap analysis of your documents, and they're responding to you. Quality Matters at ANAB.com, I believe it is, sorry. They'll send you information back, but at least there is the information going back and forth. They are using ShareFile. I'm probably very, I'm not sure what the right word is, but with ShareFile, I went through ShareFile and I set up folders for every one of our documents and put them into different folders, whether it was a PT folder. I looked at the folders on ShareFile as I would when I went out on an assessment of my own as to what documents I thought that they should be looking at, and it turned out that I really didn't have to provide any other documents when they were on site. Most of the time I just would say to them, well, that was in ShareFile, and it would require the assessors to go look it up. So it was very beneficial that we could go through, set up, I took the time to set up the ShareFile with all the individual folders, labeled them all, put the documents in there, and then they were already set. And we had that done a couple months before our assessment. And I knew people were looking at it because I was getting comments of, oh, we can't read this one, could you maybe re-upload it? So it was very few things, but it was all done prior to them coming on site. We mentioned that we had some nonconformities issued against our laboratory during this, and we appealed. We had 5, and we appealed 3 of them, and we won all 3 appeals. And mostly because everybody doesn't know the standards, and they have to show that they have documentation that is for that particular standard. But we asked questions, and we asked what it meant. We made sure that we had meetings every day with our lead assessor as we were going through this, so that nothing was a surprise when it came up at the end of the week. So we just kept that communication line open. Again, a reminder that you are already meeting almost all of the requirements for accreditation. You shouldn't really be reinventing the wheel. Trust in yourself, trust in your quality assurance department, trust in the people that you have, if it's not you and you have other people doing it, but don't go through and make major changes, because that's where we all start making mistakes. We think we've corrected it and we really have copied and pasted in the wrong way. There really shouldn't be any major changes going on if you've been accredited to the 17025-2005 standards. We're very fortunate in Arizona. We have a very good network of quality assurance managers, and we meet on a very regular basis. And we talk to each other to see how they're interpreting the new standards. We have meetings to see what's come up, what are they doing. If you don't have that ability to talk to local labs, reach out to a neighboring state. Reach out to somebody through ASCLD and see if there's a lab that will help you out. Again, we're just fortunate, and if you don't have that set up, I would highly recommend getting a state, if you will, peer group of quality assurance managers or quality assurance unit.
And then start thinking about risk assessment. And one of the things that you need to realize is that you already do risk assessment yourself. You do risk assessment in your daily life, your personal life, but you also, by nature of our jobs, we do risk assessment already. It's just how do we package that into, standard 8? How do we package that into risk assessment? We didn't really use any formal risk assessment tools, but what we did is we went through our quality manual and we said, okay, where do we identify risks? What tools do we use? Internal audits, tech reviews. We have our tech leads go to labs once a quarter, and we give them tasks, and then they do those tasks, and then they come back and issue reports based on what they've learned. So those types of risk assessments, I think right now the big takeaway is you need to start getting into the risk assessment thinking mode.
I mentioned don't panic. Your quality assurance team is really on the ball. You're in quality assurance because you like it. Most people anyway aren't forced to be inside quality assurance when they don't want to have anything to do with it. We are a wacky group of people. We talk in acronyms like everybody else, but we really have a love for it, and most people doing quality do as well, and they will be on the ball with it. One thing that we've learned over the course of many years of being an accredited laboratory is to stop making changes during the assessment. That can get you into trouble. Obviously, if it's something very simple and that says if you just change this one line in your manual, that finding will go away, stop and think before you do it, and think about the repercussions of changing one manual. Do you have to change the next manual or the next manual? There could be a waterfall effect with that. So just be leery, or wary, I guess I should say, of making changes during the assessment. Stuart talked about the internal audit needing to be very involved during the year of your assessment. That will greatly help you determine whether or not your own system is meeting all of the new standards. and we've mentioned it time and time again, but make sure you're communicating with your lead assessor. If you are a manager or a superintendent and you are responsible for the quality manager, please, please, please give them time and resources to get this accreditation done. We're making it sound perhaps that it's easy. We're not by any means saying it's easy. It is very time consuming, but the resources are there. We're outside the state maybe or within the state, but within your own laboratory, you have all of the resources and available tools to get through this accreditation.
So finally, what we want to leave you with before we get to questions is that, you know, you have to just keep calm, and it's a big task, but it's a big task that can be taken down one task item, one action item, one delegated item at a time. You know, I encourage you, and it looks like some of you have already started this, and that you're right on the right track, is that you a year out, 6 months out, depending on how much work there's to be done, you know, start knocking things off. Make a list and start knocking things off. You know, this is something that should be in our wheelhouse. It shouldn't cause us a lot of stress, even though it does. But we get through it by making a task list and knocking those task lists off one at a time. So thank you all for your attention. I see that there are quite a few questions, and with that, we'll turn it over to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Stuart and Brooke. That was very good. So I'm going to just jump right into the questions then, and feel free to have, you know, both of you or one of you to answer them. So is there any policy about migration to paperless operation?
Not specifically. You know, I'm sort of going to sound like a broken record, but you know, what risk is involved in that? What risks have you identified, you know, that are involved in that? I think that we have a retention schedule in the state of Arizona that says that homicides can never be destroyed, and so going paperless, that's going to take us a little bit of time to figure out how we want to do that. But specifically, I don't believe there's a standard that addresses migrating to paperless.
Okay, so this is kind of a question and comment altogether, so I'll go ahead and read it for the whole group. Delilah says, I studied at GWU, but in South Africa, no police labs are accredited as yet, which needs to be addressed. In South Africa, things are very difficult. I would appreciate any assistance, especially with the new QA manuals. Our situation is very unique, which has obstructed procedures. Any input or guidance would be greatly appreciated. I had training at the FBI with hair and fiber analysis and the correct procedures. Our lab needs to implement some of these basic SOPs and need to become accredited. From the lessons you guys have learned, can you give them a little bit of advice?
Well, first off, get into either with the emails here and reach out to people and ask if they have quality assurance manuals that they're willing to send you. Start small. Don't think you can take on an entire lab and get it accredited in one fell swoop. Maybe pick one discipline and work through that one at the same time, but start with a quality assurance manual. Many states have electronic versions available online, or we've given our email addresses, and you're more than welcome to send an email to us and we can send you ours. Ours works for our agency, may not work for yours, but at least it would give you a starting point. If you could contact ASCLD, because it's a Society of Quality Assurance Managers, that would be a really good point in which to get some other information from quality assurance. And ASCLD, as an organization, has started an accreditation initiative, which would be another organization to reach out to and see about getting some help or some guidance in becoming accredited.
Okay. So how do you decide whom to choose from the personnel to do validations?
Well, it's going to be a shock to most of you, but you need to identify the risk associated with that. In Louisiana, we had people who, if you were the first, you were a newbie, you were doing validations, you were doing QC checks, you were doing QC reagent checks under the direction of a supervised, experienced criminalist. Just because that got you into understanding the validation, understanding the quality process. Here in Arizona at DPS, we kind of leave the validations up to the tech leads and the experienced analysts, and leave the newbies to kind of do their own, do casework and get their experience in casework. So it depends on your philosophy. We do have some lab techs that we actually went through a training program with them, and we've authorized them to to do some validations and do some performance checks and stuff like that. But it depends on your philosophy and your risk evaluation.
Okay. The next question is, how are the disciplines listed under AR 3125 6.2.2.1 the areas that can be included in your scope of work?
I don't know. I don't have it in front of us. But what you can do, there is if you go into A&AB, and I think it's under the forensic accreditation section of that website. There is a guidance document 3064, which is an example scope that kind of gives you all of the available scopes. And my guess is there's probably more disciplines on the example scope than there is in the 3125. But without looking at it, and I don't have it memorized off the top of my head, I can't be sure.
Okay. Do you have a procedure to measure uncertainty in weight measurement?
Weights for controlled substances, yes, and I'd be more than happy to send that to you. Also for toxicology, if you're looking at quantifying a number, but if you want to just send me an email, I'll be more than happy to send that to you after this presentation.
With regards to the technical reviews of testimony, what if all employees don't get called to testify in that 2-year period?
Then they can't count it against you. It would be not applicable. You would just have to, we can't force people to go testify, or they can't, we can't say, well, you have to go to court. That just doesn't happen. We have people that haven't testified for 4 and 5 years. So we make sure that if they need assistance or if they do go to court after that, we do a follow-up with that. But as far as the accrediting body goes, it's of the testimony that is being reviewed, is the technical aspect of it being reviewed.
Okay. And can you share what risk assessment tool you've used in your evaluations that you found helpful?
Well, we didn't really use any formal risk assessment tools. We didn't do the FMEA or risk matrix formally. We kind of did it in our head, and I think quality managers know, because that's just that's the way that we're kind of wired, is that when we see something or hear something, we kind of get that, oh, that's not good kind of feeling. But for us, and a lot of labs have this already, your corrective action policy or procedures, what can be handled at the unit level, what can be handled, at the supervisor level, what can be handled at the manager level, what can be handled at the quality level. These kind of different levels and how you can handle stuff is a risk assessment. Stuff that can be handled at the unit level is things that are pretty low risk. But stuff that enters into your corrective action policy, where you actually are doing a corrective action, you've determined that that's a high risk area. And so you identify those things through tech reviews, through admin reviews, through management reviews, through internal audits. And so, we're already doing this, and I think we just need to be more comfortable packaging and communicating that.
Do we need to identify risks for each specific field or identify risks generally for the whole organization?
I would recommend both. I mean, that's sort of what your supervisors and tech leads for your disciplines, they identify the risks. And, if you've got, I'm trying to think, if you've got a unit full of new people, because you've had turnover or people have retired and you've got more new people than experienced people, that risk of them performing casework is probably greater than that risk if the unit was full of 20-year-old experienced analysts or 20-year experienced analysts. On the flip side, we have people who've been around for 20 years and just think these new rules are just rules and poppycock. So so it depends on your situation, and it depends on your lab and the makeup of your lab, but I would think that you would want to at least look at both the discipline and the system.
And one more risk assessment follow-up before we switch to a slightly different topic, but how do you document the outcome of your risk assessment?
That's one of them that we're doing a work in progress, but going through our reports, I go back and I write a follow-up memo right now, and I keep documentation, whether it's something, we use Qualtrics as our management system, and we have documentation in there that I can pull from at any time, and then I write a follow-up report showing, or I run a report in Qualtrics and I attach it to a report that says this is one of the action items that we have, our risk assessment, and this is how we can show that we were in compliance with that and we actually followed up with it. And some of those have honestly directed us into other areas and opened up, I will say, a can of worms with a few things. And so we just constantly are keeping track of things, whether it's now in Qualtrics or whether it's in my office with documentation. So we haven't really, this is new to us too, and we've only been really doing risk assessment officially since November. And so we will probably change it about a half a dozen more times before we get it to a system that we actually like.
Do you have a checklist with examples of evidence for any of the requirements of the standard?
Well, that would be part of our internal audit. And so in that sense, we have, Stuart is in charge of our internal audit, and he makes up items to look at, if you will, for that. And so we have documentation with, are they in compliance with this standard? It's not necessarily just a yes or no question. And then they have to give feedback as to what they saw for it. So it might be a list of case numbers. So we don't necessarily keep the cases with it, but we can go and do a trickle-down effect and say, well, we can go pull this case, or we can pull that case, or we can pull this document. So we have a checklist per se that works for us with our internal audit that we do for each of the standards.
For requirement 7.11, did your lab just consider the LIMS like Justice Tracks, or did you consider all your systems, such as like instrument software, storage servers, DIMMs, etc.?
So we keep track of all of our systems in the sense that if something changes, we do have a list of what was changed on it as far as like an upgrade to software, if that's what the question is saying. We do document or do look at we're going through a validation of our LIMS system right now, which is Justice Tracks, and they're going through and documenting and doing some side-by-side comparisons of our new system, the new upgraded system. I can't remember what number we're up to, 3.0 or whatever it might be, to the old one. So yes, we are keeping that with LIMS. As far as the other one goes, whenever there is a need for an upgrade in software, we've asked many of our tech leads to look at it and see if it's a bigger issue with the instrument itself, and they may have to do a performance check. If it's just a direct software update that has no reflection of going to affect the technical aspects, we don't necessarily worry about that.
Yeah, I think that we, fortunately for us, we are pretty well paper-based. And I think the more system and computer and paperless you are, the more that would come into play. But we just had our toxicology tech lead perform a performance check because I think we went from the operating system on the computer either went from like Windows 7 to Windows 10, or I can't exactly remember why. We didn't think that was going to be an issue, but we wanted to make sure that the computer that controlled the methods of the instrument, making that jump from Windows 7 to Windows 10, that there wasn't any kind of, fuzzy stuff going on when you deal with computers.
How did you address the need for personnel to be competency tested before being able to conduct tests on evidence? And where did you get your training samples from, especially in the drug discipline?
What was the second part? Oh, I can read it.
Where did you get training samples? Yeah.
So
Okay.
let me answer the second part, and then Stuart can answer the first part. So for our training samples, especially in the drug discipline, we have the ability, our cases, since we're a state laboratory, we also do disposals of all the evidence. So once a case is available for disposal, we can go down and take core samples from that particular case. If there's something that we need out of a case, we have it available in our manuals and through our customer service agreements that we have, that sometimes we can take a portion of the sample and use it for training purposes. So we do that as well, but most of our drug samples come from cases that have gone through disposal within our system. So now Stuart will answer the first part.
So the first part of the question is, you have to read what the standard says. And most of us think of a competency test as like a laboratory practical. And I think my opinion is that a competency test can take many forms. And so we have lab techs who prepare our known DNA samples. So they cut the buccal swabs, they open the evidence, they cut the buccal swabs, and they put them in tubes for the DNA analyst on the knowns rotation. Our competency test for them, before they could get into supervised casework, was to successfully complete the modules up to supervised casework, and then the tech lead would look at their paperwork and sign off on it. It's a little in the gray area, we understand, but we do have a more firmer ground with our latent print analysts, where they will do a set of packets, processing packets that we've mocked up for them as their competency before they do supervised process paperwork. So it depends on how you interpret the standard, what exactly the standard says, and how you want to address it in however creative a fashion that you want. Once again, we decided that cutting knowns and putting them in the right tubes was kind of a medium risk, because the quality control measures that they take into consideration when they actually do the processing, it's kind of hard to mess up. But that's up to you and how you want to handle it.
And if I could jump in here for just a couple of comments as well, as far as competency tests, we've also done in Minnesota, we've done a couple other different things, as I'm sure other labs, including maybe even Arizona, have done, and that is observational testing. So for things like somebody that's maybe collecting DNA samples off of tools like a pry bar or something, we'll have the trainer, we'll mock up evidence and then have the trainer observe them to see that they're doing all the steps necessary. You don't carry it forward, but at that point, then the trainer can evaluate that they're doing the correct procedures. And then the other thing is sometimes we'll have more experienced scientists finish the testing, the mock-up samples for other trainees. If they are trained up to a certain point, then another scientist can carry it to the end, and then that way you could verify, for example, they didn't switch samples. So there, as Stuart said, there's a lot of different ways to look at that, at how to, comply with that standard. So we got about 4 more minutes. So I got 2 more questions here that we're going to take, and Stuart and Brooke's emails are still in the chat pod in order for any other questions that you might want to have. Is it necessary to give a reason for unable to confirm any controlled dangerous substances in the report?
So we have put on our reports, when we have a controlled substance, we can't confirm if we don't have a standard. So we do have a disclaimer on ours that something might be there. I can't remember the exact wording right now and be more than happy to send that to you. But we do include information as to something being present that we don't have a standard for, and we ask them to resubmit it at a later date if we should be able to get the standard in. So it just really depends what the drug is before and deciding how we do the wording on the report.
Okay, and back to the question with regards to the list of software systems. Do you think, or does it mean that you have a log of all system failures as it pertains to all of your information systems like LIMS, Qualtrics, DIMS, etc.?
I don't believe so. I think it's an in-game summary type of deal where it works. You want it to do this, and it does this. If you want it to do this and it doesn't do this, I think that, in my opinion, would speak for itself. Our validation is, for our LIMS software is we needed to do X, Y, and Z because our current software does X, Y, and Z. And can we get it and can we show that it consistently does X, Y, and Z? I think that we don't get into the granular of any system failures other than, I think they do, if they do have a system failure that they can't understand or can't fix, that they'll reach out to the vendor and the vendor support. And I think they keep those records, but it's one of those things where it's an in-game summary, and then if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Great. Well, that's all the questions that we have for the Q&A. Again, if you have something specific, you can go ahead and email Brooke or Stuart. And I wanted to thank everybody for attending. We will be having archived versions of these both with RTI as well as on the ASCLD website at ascld.org. It'll be a little bit before we get all 5 of them from this 2019 Train the Director series, but we do currently have the 2016 Train the Director series on our website already, and that was supported by RTI as well. So again, thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you, Brooke and Stuart, for your presentations today. Obviously, the first thing we always like to do is to thank our presenters, not only for taking the time to present today, but also all of the research that does go into producing one of these webinars. So thank you so much for all the hard work that you've done in your field. Also, we would like to thank our audience for attending and supporting our webinars today. These webinars are just not possible without your attendance and support, so thank you for joining us. You will see there in the middle of your screen our short customer service survey. If you simply click on the word here, it will open up a new window for you where you can go through our survey real quick. Your feedback is always valued information that we try to use to make sure we're giving you the best webinar information and experience possible. So please take a few moments to do that. You will also notice in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, we do have a PDF version of today's slides. So go ahead and click on the title of the file there, and then click the download files button directly below that to be able to download the PDF version before you leave today. You will see that Julian there in the chat pod has put a link out to all of our social media offerings that we do have. We have Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as Twitter. So be sure to follow us on all of our social media outlets if you are not doing so already. We also do have our podcast that Julian put in there. If we just started our newest season of our podcast. We try to update one at least once a week. So be sure to start following our podcasts and listening to the offerings we have there. As Christine did mention, we are recording and archiving this as well as all of the webinars in the series. The previous 4 are up on our website at www.forensiccoe.org under the ASCLD tab, and then we will be converting this one into our archival version as well. And you'll be able to refer back to all of the webinars in this series as well as pass them along to any colleagues that might have missed out. Again, for the file below in the bottom left, simply click on the title of the file name and then click the download files button directly below that. It will highlight once you highlight the title. The download files button will give you a prompt to be able to download that. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you ASCLD for putting together such a wonderful webinar series, and we hope everyone enjoyed and learned something from our fantastic speakers today. Everyone have a great afternoon, and we will see you on our next webinar.